Things that go bump in EH5. Welcome to the North of Edinburgh, a location filled with history and many fascinating tales. Granton first appears on maps in the 17th century, relating to the now demolished Granton Castle. The name also appears in Granton Burn, which now runs through Caroline Park down to Granton Beach. The name is presumed to come from Grant's Town or Grant's Dun. In 1834, Edinburgh debated the need for a more significant harbour. In his capacity as President of the Institution of Civil Engineers, James Walker oversaw a committee, including Admiral David Milne, to choose between three options: an extension to the existing Leith docks, a new harbour at Trinity, or a new harbour at Granton. The initial bid for Trinity did not receive parliamentary consent, and in 1836 a second bill promoting Granton was agreed. It received royal assent on the 21st of April 1837. During the First World War, the Navy used Granton Harbour as the base for minesweeping equipment, mainly Scottish trawlers and their crews called into active service and conscripted as part of the Royal Navy Reserve. During this period, the harbour officially renamed as HMS Gunner. When referred to in military documents about the name of the largest trawler in its fleet. The Trinity area sits nearby and features a fascinating history. The name derives from Trinity House in Leith, which formerly held these lands and had a large estate farm, Trinity Mains, in the area. The coat of arms from the farm preserved on the roof of a modern block on Newhaven Main Street. Although having some buildings from the 18th century, the area developed mainly in the early 19th century as a mansion house district broadly comparable in style to the Grange area of Edinburgh. Many buildings were second homes for affluent families in the new town and treated as a country retreat. Today, we discover several tales from these areas within the north of the city. Tales of North Edinburgh nightmares. The Wardie playing fields lie at the end of Wardie Primary School and run adjacent to Granton Road. The substantial area of urban green space has served the local area for many years and in various guises. During World War II, the grounds then known as Lochinvar Camp served as a naval training camp. A recollection from the time states the field featured a parade ground, accommodation, admin block and allotment space, rendering the area self-contained. After the war ended, the grounds passed to Edinburgh Council and converted to homeless accommodation. The 10 corrugated iron construction blocks house more than 100 families. The camp remained in use between 1946 and 1956 and used for housing. Soon afterwards, the abandoned blocks fell into disrepair and vandalism. The area later converted to a sports ground used by Wardie's school, rugby teams and Hibs Football Club. It was during this period that I would begin the story. In 1951, a teenager taking a shortcut between Granton Road and Netherby Road encountered something strange. The girl, on her way to Young's newsagent on Cargill Terrace, stood pursued by a figure moving at speed behind her. She managed to pass through the large gates onto Netherby Road after seeing a character in a cap following her. Upon turning round to check if the man still pursued, the figure had vanished. A witness who worked at Wardie Primary School in the late 1970s, recalls opening up the school on a cold morning in the late autumn. He remembers standing at the rear gate of the school playground, looking onto the sports field, when something caught his attention. Heading directly towards him through the morning mist was a figure. The shape was that of a man dressed in clothing suited to the 1940s, complete with a flat cap. The staff member called out, thinking that the man was maybe the caretaker, but he did not reply. He continued to watch the man approach him, only to vanish into the morning mist and disappear. In the summer of 1989, a student from the Dudley area called Alan sat in the janitor's office of Wardie Primary School. Alan, in need of extra cash, took on the role of the auxiliary janitor. After his day's duties, he nodded off in the small office and later awoke as it was beginning to get dark. Alan, in a panic of missing his dinner, quickly made his way around the school corridors, checking that everything was secure. As Alan reached the school dining hall, he noticed through the glass a figure staring directly at him from railings in the grounds of the playing fields. The description of the man he saw that night was very similar to reports from previous witnesses. In 1992, a group of workmen working on an extensive roof conversion on Boswell Road saw the spectral figure not once but over 3 times. The men worked on the Boswell Road conversion from the August that year until December. The first time that the sighting of the shape reported was by a roofer working on the far side of the property and overlooking the Wardie playing fields. The stranger, wearing traditional attire, spotted in September. It was by a labourer and then again by a joiner working on the roof in October. All 3 of the workers gave the same description of whom or what they saw. On an excellent clear autumn night in 2009, 3 friends gathered in the playing fields to witness a much publicised meteor shower. The group met at about 9 o'clock at night and took their seats to sit back and enjoy the Saturday evening spectacle. After about an hour of spectacular meteors over the horizon of what they referred to as Lockies, they decided to head back. It was at this point when they spotted a man approaching them through the darkness. The 3 of them expected spectators or maybe even the caretaker of the nearby Wardie Residence Club. Instead, the strange figure in old-fashioned clothing passed them almost as if they did not exist. I have never managed to work out just who the strange figure could be. Some witnesses who I've spoken to think that it might be a ghost from the days gone by and possibly connected with the homeless camp between 1946 and 1956. One witness reckons that due to the character's dress, maybe even before that period. To the best of my knowledge, there have been no recent sightings of the Wardie playing fields phantom since the Saturday evening in 2009. Some time ago, in a previous episode of North Edinburgh Nightmares, we discussed a resident of the Trinity area. The story of an older man reported continuing to visit Royston Terrace and its surrounding premises even after his death many years ago. As the story goes, a resident named Eck was a typical visitor to the then Spears Bar. A man with a reputation for his persistent requests for charity earned him the title of Eck the Cadger. Supposedly, after years of borrowing from businesses of the area, Eck one day set out to repay his debts. a substantial windfall on a race resulting in the euphoric man exiting the bookmakers in high spirits to relay the news of his newfound bequest. However, Eck the Cadger would not reach his destination to relay his good news. The excited man tragically killed by a passing vehicle on the long and busy Ferry Road. Sometime later, the sights of an older man fitting Eck's description would materialise throughout the vicinity of his tragic death. The story relayed to me in the early months of the 1990s. I would visit Spears Bar and chat with neighbours from where I lived. Now old enough to enter the hostelry, I would hear tales from an elderly neighbour I had known since a young age. A Welshman and passionate trade unionist, he would relay stories of injustice to workers and the struggles he encountered and fought over the years. The more dramas that would follow, the greater the stories would become. The one tale that he would tell me continuously for many years was that of Eck. The story would always appear at the end of the evening as a surprise supernatural treat. Although heard many times, I would always act surprised to listen to the ghostly activities of the hapless Eck time and time again. A local man who frequented the pub and a well-known face in local politics would acknowledge me with a nod whenever the sound of the legendary Eck the Cadger's name would arise. The legend that was the eccentric storytelling neighbour passed away sometime in 1996. His stories ceased. Whether the flat-capped opportunist continues to visit the area and his favourite Spears Bar today is unknown. One thing is for sure. I shall never forget the tale relayed to me time and time again as the clock struck 10 of the legend that is Eck the Cadger. During the early years of the 1980s, a scary story surfaced not far from where I lived. Local urban legends were commonplace in the area. We had come to take some of them with a pinch of salt. However, this one was something entirely different. Directly off Ferry Road and halfway down South Trinity Road was a large and unusual office block. Run by NHS Scotland, Trinity Park House constructed in the mid-1970s. The peculiar 70s architecture and many curves and slopes did not look out of place from a science fiction film. The surrounding area, however, was pure Hammer horror. Trees and dense bushes populate the grounds of Trinity Park House. Paths and narrow walkways form a way around its perimeter. On the Ferry Road side of the property stands a solitary cottage. The destitute and abandoned building acquired the title of the Haunted. The first instance of unusual activity arrived from a school friend whose next door neighbour walked his dog at night on the grounds of Trinity Park House. The man approaching the Ferry Road almost in sight of the cottage suddenly stopped dead in his tracks. Approached by a solitary figure standing directly in his path, the man stood slightly unnerved. He attempted to make conversation with the shape, but it refused to move. In the end, the man backed away and retreated with his silent and terrified dog. The second encounter came when tradesmen working on the rear of the offices commented on an out-of-order security guard standing watching them from the trees. The man ignored them and stared with menace as they constructed a scaffold that day. When the workers mentioned the story to the on-duty security guard, he accused them of spending the day at the nearby Spears pub instead of carrying out the work. There was no other security guard whatsoever that day. In the summer months of 1989, a group of youths came face to face with a large dark shape. The incident occurred on the path leading up to the old cottage on the grounds of Trinity Park House. A witness relays that it did not move or speak, but instead began to stomp towards them. Silently, and without as much as a breath, the figure vanished after entering adjacent woodland. The witness states of his hesitance to return to the location after his encounter that warm summer night. We did not return to the cottage again. We always took care when approaching what came known as Spooky Corner from that day on. Trinity Park House, demolished in 2007, now known as Larkfield Gardens. The location is now entirely unrecognisable. Unique properties fill the grounds and the 1970s architecture is long gone. However, the atmosphere remains. If you manage to visit the former site of Trinity Park House, the area known as Spooky Corner remains unchanged. Regarding the sinister property known as the Haunted, it is currently looking for a new tenant. Whether anybody has seen the Trinity Park House shape, or the Beaky as it came to be known, is another matter entirely. The chilling case of the Trinity poltergeist remains one that has fascinated me for many years. As a resident of the area, I became intrigued by the story. The prospect of such a famously documented case within the location in which I lived. Having discovered the street name in a newspaper article on the 1830s story, I was suitably impressed. Trinity Crescent, situated between the extensive Lower Granton Road curve and concluding at Starbank Road, is an address well known to me, having spent substantial time in the vicinity in the 1990s. The terrifying tale captured in the 1954 book Dangerous Ghosts by the legendary Elliot O'Donnell is indeed frightening. Here, the legendary author of Scottish ghost stories and tales of terror recalls.
In 1835, Captain Molesworth rented a house at Trinity, near Edinburgh, which belonged to a Mr. Webster. After he'd been in the place for about 2 months, he complained of unusual noises and accused Mr. Webster, who lived next door, of making them. Mr. Webster indignantly disputed the charge. The noises continued, and Captain Molesworth not only took up the boards in the room in which the noises were worst, but bored holes into one of the walls which divided his residence from that of Mr. Webster to detect the culprit. His efforts were fruitless. The disturbances became worse. There were footsteps made by invisible feet, knockings, scratchings, and the rustling of dresses. Sometimes the knocker seemed to be trying to play a tune, and if asked a question, would respond by so many knocks. Alarming things happened. Beds were raised during the night as if someone was underneath them, and the knockings were so violent at times that the walls shook. Captain Molesworth had 2 daughters. One of them was named Matilda, the other Jane. Matilda had died recently. Jane, who was between 12 and 13 years of age, was frequently ill in bed. The fact that the noises were most frequent and loudest in her room made some people think she made them. Other people believed that it was the ghost of Matilda, warning Jane that she was doomed to die very shortly. Sheriff officers, masons, magistrates, army officers and friends and relatives of Captain Molesworth spent nights in the house in the hope of solving the mystery. Jane was bound to prevent her from playing any tricks, all to no purpose. The disturbances continued and grew worse and worse. At length, unable to stand the haunting any longer, Captain Molesworth left the house. Mr. Webster brought an action against him for the damages committed by taking up the boards, breaking the walls and firing bullets at the panelling, and slander of title, declaring that the tenant defamed the house through spreading the report of its hauntings. The lawsuit lasted for 2 years and lawyers examined numerous witnesses. I have been unable to find out how it ended. Jane Molesworth died soon after she left the house, and the people who subsequently took it never complained of any mysterious disturbances.
Situated in the green leafy suburbs of Edinburgh's Trinity area is Park Road. The attractive location sits close to Trinity Academy and a mere stone's throw from Newhaven Village. Park Road has quite a history. At the end of the road stands an impressive and foreboding property. Constructed in 1860, Dunforth House served as a children's home until 2005. In 1954, screen legend Roy Rogers and his wife Dale Evans visited the home for a guest appearance for the children residents. The couple, enamoured by the children and 13-year-old Marion Fleming. They would go on to adopt the orphaned youngster and return to America for a remarkable new life. The heartwarming story captured the nation's hearts. Dunforth House and its children would now be part of this story forever. Park Road was also the location of another home, but this one has a very different story. At the opposite end of the road, towards the beginning of Stanley Road, is a large and imposing property. As a youngster, growing up and attending nearby Trinity School, the building had a reputation. The sinister-looking property acquired the ominous title of the Ghost House. St. Ola was home to vulnerable adults and run by the Salvation Army. By the end of the 1980s, the property stood derelict and unoccupied. It did not take long for local youths to manage to enter the building and explore its much-discussed grounds. Every area has its creepy old house, dark and old-fashioned, with shadows by the windows. This house was no different, and St. Ola an object of local legend to the youngsters of Trinity. The first of the stories commenced when youths inside the vacant property claimed to witness a figure observing them from the top floor window. I recall 3 different groups who all claimed to have seen the dark figure peering down above them. Perhaps a rough sleeper or a guard, but one thing was specific. Whenever any of the youths were inside the building, there was absolutely no one else present. Not a sight or sound of anybody fitted the description from the upstairs window, but still the stories persisted. A local boy from Newhaven moved out of his family home after ongoing arguments with his parents. He decided to camp out on the grounds of St. Ola until he could arrange suitable accommodation. The boy, who would have been about 17 years old at the time, entered St. Ola in the early spring. He opted against staying in the main building and instead inside a small outhouse close to the front entrance. He described a feeling of something watching him as he attempted to bed down for the night in the darkness of the tiny house. On one occasion, he witnessed somebody trying to climb through the same window which he had entered. He called out to whoever it was, and at that exact moment, the figure vanished. After a couple of nights in St. Ola, the young man ran from the property, leaving his belongings after witnessing a dark figure inside the small room he slept. He never returned to collect his personal effects. They remained visible inside for months to come. The final strange story, and the most chilling, happened in the early months of the following year. After several months of inquisitive yet respectful youths visiting the house on Park Road, the hooligan element would arrive. Wanton destruction ensued with vandalism to the impressively preserved property. A door smashed which caught the eye of neighbours and eventually the police. I managed to visit Santola for a final visit before the building sold and became a private tenancy. I was disappointed to see the extent of the vandalism of this mysterious and legendary building. Santola, the subject of so many stories over the years, the walls daubed in graffiti and various slogans of the day adorning the walls. One stood out from the rest among the slogans declaring football teams, political persuasion and vulgar jokes on display. Painted in large red letters and situated in the middle of the wall read the following: Cave Sancti Ola. Every other piece of graffiti adorned using black or blue spray paint, this phrase, however, applied using a broad brush and bright red colour from a tin. None of the youths involved had much interest in the Latin language to the best of my knowledge. I can only imagine somebody else responsible for this slogan that appeared. As it turns out, the red paint was not so much a slogan, but a warning. The English translation reading, "Beware of Saint Ola." Welcome to the charming green and leafy area known as Inverleith. The attractive North Edinburgh location features the world-famous Fettes College, the glorious Inverleith Park and the marvellous Royal Botanic Gardens. Arboretum Road leads from the expansive Ferry Road and concludes at Inverleith Place. It is here our first story begins. In or around about 1987, a newspaper delivery boy met with a terrifying encounter on Arboretum Road. The youngster progressed along the steep descent of the road as usual that dark winter morning. Upon reaching the entrance to an address situated near Stuart's Melville Junior School and the Polish Consulate building, the youngster paused for a moment. The tall stone pillars greeted the boy as he entered the grounds and walked along the dark path towards the property. The sound of his footsteps upon the gravel suddenly ceased as the sight of a dog appearing from nearby trees greeted him. As the animal gleefully approached him, the boy knelt to pat the dog, only for it to vanish before his very eyes suddenly. The startling incident soon became irrelevant as to what happened next. From a nearby expanse of woodland, the delivery boy became alerted to the sound of heavy steps approaching him from within the woods. The quiet and peaceful sound of the early morning dawn now replaced by the echoes of heavy and ominous footsteps. He recalls witnessing the movement of branches and shrubbery as whatever approached drew closer with each second. It was at this point that the now terrified youth ran from the property. Upon reaching the gate, the boy turned briefly. The sound of the crashing was now absent, and no sign of the mysterious woodland shape to see. At that exact moment, he jumped with fright. The sight of a large mass of approaching squirrels running from the rear of the property and fleeing towards the gate where he stood. He never witnessed any similar events within the grounds again. The William Bryan House Hotel stood situated in the Inverleith area. It was a property with a terrifying past. The exact location is unknown, except for being number 17 and demolished in 1935. one possible location being a row of houses in the vicinity of the Royal Botanic Gardens. The building held a reputation as thoroughly haunted for many years. The 1915 murder of a medical student, Andrew Muir, remains unsolved to this day. Still, the circumstances surrounding his death have led many to question whether it was a human that took his life or something else entirely. Around his untimely death, Andrew is said to have been investigating the paranormal activity within the William Bryan House Hotel. During this time, several staff and visitors had reportedly seen an evil apparition during their time in the building that watched their every move. Unsurprisingly, most of them left the hotel and never returned. Acting on a dare from his friends, Andrew asked the owners if it would be possible for him to hold a midnight séance in the room with the most activity. They agreed to his bizarre request and left him with a bell. The owners told him to ring if he needed anything. Sure enough, a few hours into the séance, the bell began to chime loudly, followed by one blood-curdling scream. When the owners entered the room, they found Andrew's lifeless body with 2 bleeding puncture wounds in his neck. Many believe the murder was the work of the apparition, who they claim is the late William Bryan, also known as the house's previous owner. Sources from the time said that Bryan was buried 40 foot down in a secured coffin after his passing, as per his strict instructions. But no one ever knew why he had made these strange demands. Could it be that he was afraid of becoming a vampire? The Trinity area contains many grand and impressive properties, with titles the likes of Gothic House, Grecian Cottage and Holly Lodge. Stunning turreted buildings adorn the green and leafy paths which interlink throughout its streets. Situated at the latter half of York Road is Woodbine Cottage. The house dates to 1860 and reportedly haunted. A family who lived in the cottage for 10 years purchased the property in 1939. The woman would live alone within its walls from 1942 until 1946, while her husband served in India. Reports of strange sounds throughout and a hidden passage reportedly linking the cottage to the shore exist, an ex-resident recall. It is rumoured that there is a secret passage between the shore and the cottage that smugglers used. I hasten to add that was many years before my mother was the occupant. This fact may connect to the ghostly noises heard by my mother. The remnant northeast wing of the 15th century Wardie Castle, later Wardie House, survives on Wardie House Lane. The building was rebuilt in 1780 by Sir Alexander Boswell, who gives his name to Boswell Road. The most notable building on Boswell Road was Wardie Lodge, later renamed Challenger Lodge by Sir John Murray in 1914 after his Challenger expedition investigating abyssal life forms in the deep oceans. After use as a children's home, the proprietor converted it to St Columba's Hospice. Another nearby property, the title and address I shall not disclose, remains the subject of paranormal activity even to this day. Having spoken to 2 ex-residents of the property over the last 3 decades, both revealed stories of a ghostly nature. The sound of screams in the day and night populate the large and imposing property. Neither of the 2 ex-residents would manage to discover a source for the blood-curdling, agonising cries throughout their stay. In 2021, the building became the location for an upcoming Hollywood film and accommodated by film crew and staff over weeks. After filming commenced and the production began to close, I met with staff on site. The one question I had to ask was if they had encountered any strange goings-on within the property during their weeks of filming. The staff member confirmed with another staff member within the property that crew had temporarily stopped filming due to problems with sound equipment on several occasions. The sound of screaming halted it. From the harbour walls of Wardie Bay to the Cadger legend told, the imposing trail of Luchrabank and Granton tales of old, the stately homes of Trinity, the haunted sounds inside, the things that bump within the night, the ghosts of EH5.